32-year-old divorced virgin entered the wrong room, slept with her boss, got pregnant, and now Naomi slipped out of bed as quietly as possible, her mind racing. She grabbed her dress from the floor, her hands shaking as she tried to piece together the night before. The company retreat, the welcome mixer, too much champagne, walking to what she thought was her room. What happens when one wrong turn destroys everything you thought you knew about your life? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. What happens when one wrong turn destroys everything you thought you knew about your life? Naomi Jenkins stood outside room 314 at the Savannah Grand Hotel, her company key card trembling in her wine-warmed fingers. The hallway felt like it was spinning just a little bit. 3 glasses of champagne at the company mixer had been too many, but after 6 months of rebuilding her life in Georgia, she finally felt like celebrating. At 32, she was done playing it safe, done being the quiet, obedient wife her ex-husband had tried to mold her into back in Flint, Michigan, done apologizing for taking up space in the world. The key card beeped green. She pushed the door open, kicked off her heels, and collapsed onto the king-size bed without even turning on the lights. The cotton sheets felt like heaven against her skin as she drifted off to sleep, finally at peace for the first time in years. But peace never lasts. Naomi woke up to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the scent of expensive cologne that definitely wasn't hers. Her heart stopped when she turned over and saw him. Asher Blackwood, the 25-year-old CEO who owned half of Georgia's tech industry and all of its gossip headlines. His dark hair was messy against the white pillowcase, and even asleep, he looked like trouble wrapped in a $3,000 suit. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't her room, this wasn't her bed, and this definitely wasn't supposed to happen. Naomi slipped out of bed as quietly as possible, her mind racing. She grabbed her dress from the floor, her hands shaking as she tried to piece together the night before. The company retreat, the welcome mixer, too much champagne, walking to what she thought was her room. Room 314. She was supposed to be in 341. Asher stirred, his eyes fluttering open. For a moment, they just stared at each other. No words, no explanations, just the weight of a mistake that felt bigger than both of them. This didn't happen, he said finally, his voice rough with sleep and something else. Maybe regret, maybe fear. Naomi nodded, even though her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Right, this didn't happen. But as she walked out of that hotel room, still wearing yesterday's dress, and carrying her heels in her hand, she knew that nothing in her life would ever be the same. Have you ever made one mistake that changed everything? Keep watching, because what happens next will shock you. The ride back to Atlanta felt like the longest 3 hours of Naomi's life. She sat in the back of the company shuttle, staring out the window at the Georgia countryside, replaying every moment of the night before. We're trying to. The details were fuzzy, like trying to remember a dream that slips away the moment you wake up. What she did remember was Asher's face when he saw her. Not angry, not disgusted, just empty, like she was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be acknowledged. Monday morning came too fast. Naomi walked into the sleek downtown office building, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she made her way to the elevator. She'd chosen her outfit carefully. A navy blazer and matching skirt that screamed professional and untouchable. But inside, she felt like everyone could see right through her. The elevator doors opened on the 15th floor, and there he was. Asher Blackwood in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit, looking like he owned the world. Which, technically, he kind of did. Their eyes met for exactly half a second before he looked away, stepping out of the elevator without a word. Like she was invisible. Like Saturday night had been erased from existence. Naomi's assistant, Maria, was already at her desk with coffee and a stack of reports. "How was the retreat?" she asked, her voice bright with Monday morning energy. "Educational," Naomi replied, which wasn't exactly a lie. The day dragged on in a blur of meetings and emails. Every time someone mentioned the retreat, Naomi's heart jumped. Every time her phone buzzed, she wondered if it was him. But Asher Blackwood didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't acknowledge her existence. By lunch, she'd almost convinced herself that maybe it really hadn't happened. Maybe it was just a stress dream brought on by too much champagne and too many months of starting over. But then she saw him in the cafeteria, laughing with his executive team like he didn't have a care in the world. Like he hadn't woken up next to a woman whose name he probably didn't even know. That's when it hit her. She was just another scandal he needed to bury. Another problem his money and influence could make disappear. The thought made her stomach turn. She'd spent 5 years married to a man who treated her like she was less than human. She divorced him, moved to a new state, and started over from scratch just to prove she was worth more than that. She wasn't about to let another man make her feel small. But as she sat there, picking at her salad and watching Asher hold court across the room, she had no idea that in just a few weeks, ignoring each other would be the least of their problems. Sometimes the biggest storms start with the smallest clouds. And this storm was just getting started. 3 weeks passed, and Naomi threw herself into work like her life depended on it. Maybe because it did. She stayed late every night, reviewed every report twice, and volunteered for projects that would keep her busy and visible. If she was going to make it in Georgia, she needed to prove she belonged here, that she was more than just another employee who could be dismissed or forgotten. But forgetting Asher Blackwood was impossible when his face was on every business magazine in the break room and his name was mentioned in every company meeting. Did you hear about the Blackwood Industries merger? Her colleague Jennifer whispered during their morning coffee break. They're saying it's worth $2 billion. I heard his father set up some crazy conditions in his will, another co-worker added. Something about maintaining the family reputation or losing everything. Naomi kept her face neutral, but her hands tightened around her coffee cup. She'd been hearing whispers about Asher's inheritance for weeks now. Apparently, his late father had been obsessed with the family image, and the will contained strict clauses about scandal and public perception. No wonder he'd been so quick to pretend nothing happened. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, a woman who'd spent years hiding her own pain behind a perfect marriage facade, working for a man who was apparently doing the same thing on a much larger scale. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister back in Michigan. How's the new job? Meet any interesting people? Naomi stared at the message for a long moment before typing back, just focusing on work right now. It wasn't a lie. She was focusing on work. She was also trying not to think about dark hair on white pillowcases, or the way Asher's voice had sounded when he said this didn't happen, or the fact that she'd felt safer in that hotel room than she had in years of marriage. But late at night, when she was alone in her small apartment, those thoughts crept in anyway. She'd been married for 5 years and had never felt what she'd felt that night. Her ex-husband had been controlling, demanding, and utterly uninterested in her pleasure or comfort. He'd made her feel like intimacy was something shameful, something she should be grateful to receive rather than something she deserved to enjoy. That night with Asher had been different. Even through the haze of champagne and confusion, she remembered feeling wanted, desired, like she mattered. The thought scared her more than she wanted to admit. Thursday afternoon, she was reviewing quarterly reports when her assistant knocked on her door. Naomi? There's someone here to see you. She looked up to see Asher standing in her doorway, and for a moment, her heart forgot how to beat. We need to talk, he said quietly. The words hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. Naomi glanced at Maria, who was watching with barely concealed curiosity, then back at Asher. About what? She asked, even though they both knew exactly what. His jaw tightened. Not here. My office. 5 minutes. Do you know that feeling when you realize your life is about to change forever? Naomi was about to find out just how much one conversation could destroy everything she'd built. The pregnancy test sat on the bathroom counter like a tiny plastic bomb, ready to explode her world into a million pieces. 2 pink lines, clear as day, impossible to deny. Naomi stared at it for what felt like hours, her hands gripping the marble countertop so hard her knuckles turned white. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was careful. She was smart. She was supposed to be in control of her life for once. But control was apparently an illusion. She'd been feeling off for weeks, tired, nauseous, emotional in ways that didn't make sense. She blamed it on stress, on the new job, on the lingering effects of her divorce. Anything but the obvious truth that was now staring her in the face. The meeting with Asher 3 weeks ago had been brief and brutal. He'd made it clear that whatever happened in Savannah was a one-time mistake that would never be repeated or discussed. He'd been cold, professional, and utterly dismissive. "I don't know what you're expecting," he'd said, sitting behind his massive desk like a king on his throne. "But whatever it is, you're going to be disappointed." She'd wanted to slap him. Instead, she nodded and walked out, her dignity intact, but her heart bruised. Now, staring at the test, she realized he'd been right about one thing. She was going to be disappointed, just not in the way he'd meant. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Haven't heard from you in weeks. Everything okay?" Everything was not okay. Nothing was okay. She was 32 years old, divorced, living in a new state where she knew almost no one. And now she was pregnant by a man who treated her like she was toxic waste. The bathroom door felt like it was closing in on her. She grabbed the test and stumbled back to her bedroom, collapsing onto the bed she'd bought when she moved here. The bed that was supposed to represent her independence, her fresh start, her chance to build a life on her own terms. Her ex-husband's voice echoed in her head. "You're not ready for children. You can barely take care of yourself." He'd said that every time she'd brought up starting a family. 4 or 5 years. He convinced her that motherhood was something she had to earn, something she wasn't worthy of yet. And she believed him. But now, holding this test in her hands, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not just fear or panic, but also hope. This baby wasn't planned. It wasn't convenient. It definitely wasn't with the right person. But it was hers. For the first time in her adult life, something was completely, entirely hers. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She thought about Asher's cold dismissal, his obvious desire to pretend she didn't exist. How would he react to this news? Would he accuse her of lying? Of trying to trap him? Of being just another gold digger, chasing his fortune? The idea made her stomach turn. She'd grown up poor in Flint, Michigan. She'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through college. She'd clawed her way up from nothing, and she'd never asked anyone for anything she hadn't earned. But would he believe that? Would anyone? Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a news alert about Blackwood Industries' latest acquisition. Asher's face filled the screen, all sharp angles and cold confidence. The father of her child. The man who'd rather pretend she didn't exist than deal with the consequences of one night. What would you do if one night changed everything? Because what Naomi decided next would shock everyone, including herself. Naomi stood outside Asher's office for 10 minutes, her hand poised to knock, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd practiced this conversation 100 times in her head. She'd rehearsed different ways to say it, different tones to use, different responses to his inevitable anger. But now, standing here, every word she'd prepared felt inadequate. Through the glass wall, she could see him on a conference call, his jaw tight with concentration as he gestured at something on his computer screen. He looked every inch the powerful CEO, commanding, untouchable, completely in control of his world. That was about to change. She knocked, and his eyes flicked up to meet hers. For a moment, something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or annoyance. He held up one finger, indicating she should wait. 5 more minutes passed before he ended the call and waved her in. "What do you want?" he asked without preamble, not even bothering to look up from his computer. The dismissive tone made her blood boil. She'd been nothing but professional for the past month, had never approached him, never made their situation awkward for anyone. And this was how he treated her. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. "No, we don't." He finally looked at her, his expression cold and distant. "I thought I made that clear. You're going to want to hear this." Something in her voice must have gotten through to him because he leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "Fine, talk." This was it. The moment that would change everything between them, whether he wanted it to or not. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Asher's face went completely blank, like someone had just spoken to him in a foreign language. "What did you say?" I'm pregnant, she repeated, her voice steadier now. And before you ask, yes, it's yours. You're the only person I've been within, well, a very long time. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Asher's knuckles were white where he gripped the arms of his chair. That's impossible, he said finally. I have the test results if you want to see them. He stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked downtown Atlanta. This is not happening. It's happening whether you want it to or not. He spun around to face her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw real emotion in his eyes. Not the cold professionalism or casual dismissal, but raw, desperate fear. How much do you want? He asked. The question hit her like a physical blow. Excuse me, how much money do you want to make this go away? For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She'd expected denial, maybe anger, but not this. Not the immediate assumption that she was here to extort him. You think I'm trying to blackmail you? I think you're a smart woman who sees an opportunity. His voice was getting harder, more controlled. I think you know exactly what my reputation is worth, and you're here to cash in. The accusation stung more than she wanted to admit. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. I know you're divorced, struggling to make it in a new city, probably drowning in debt like everyone else your age. I know you work in accounting, so you understand numbers. And I know you're smart enough to recognize a golden opportunity when you see one. Each word was like a knife to her chest. This was the man she'd felt safe with, the man who'd made her feel desired and wanted for the first time in years. I'm not here for your money, she said quietly. Then what do you want? The question hung between them, loaded with implications she wasn't ready to face. What did she want? For him to be happy about the baby? For him to sweep her off her feet and declare his love? For him to be the man she'd imagined he might be during those late-night moments when she let herself dream? I want you to be a father, she said finally. The words seemed to hit him like a physical blow. His face went pale, and for a moment, she thought he might actually collapse. Get out, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Asher, get out of my office. Now, have you ever been accused of something you didn't do? Because what happened next would change both their lives forever. 3 days later, Naomi was sitting at her desk, trying to focus on spreadsheets, when Maria knocked on her door with a manila envelope. This just came by courier, Maria said, her voice unusually quiet. It's marked urgent. Naomi's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. The letterhead read Blackwood and Associates Legal Firm in bold, intimidating letters. But it was the words that followed that made her world crumble. Legal notice of intent to sue for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted extortion. The paper shook in her hands as she read accusation after accusation. According to Asher's lawyers, she had deliberately seduced him with the intention of becoming pregnant. She had entered his hotel room with premeditated plans to trap him into a relationship. She was attempting to extort millions of dollars from him through false pregnancy claims. Every word was like a punch to the gut. The worst part? They had security footage from the hotel showing her entering his room. They had witness statements from co-workers who'd seen her drinking at the mixer. They had a complete timeline of her calculated seduction. They turned her biggest mistake into a criminal conspiracy. Her phone rang. It was her sister calling from Michigan. Naomi, what the hell is going on? Mom just called me crying about some news article. What news article? Naomi's voice came out as a whisper. Google your name, right now. With shaking fingers, Naomi opened her laptop and typed her name into the search bar. The results made her stomach drop. Gold digger targets tech billionaire with pregnancy scam. Blackwood Industries CEO fights back against extortion attempt. From Flint to Fortune. Woman's desperate scheme to trap young billionaire. Her photo was everywhere. Her divorce records had been dug up. Her college loans, her credit score, her entire financial history was laid out for the world to see. Someone had even found her high school yearbook picture. The comments were brutal. Another woman trying to get rich off a man's success. She looks desperate. Probably planned this whole thing. Hope she gets what she deserves. Naomi, are you there? Her sister's voice seemed to come from far away. I have to go, she managed to say before hanging up. She stared at the screen, scrolling through article after article, each one painting her as a calculating predator who'd targeted an innocent young CEO. The narrative was perfect, complete, and utterly false. But who was going to believe her word against Asher Blackwood's army of lawyers and PR specialists? Her work phone rang. It was her supervisor. "Naomi, we need to talk." "My office now." The walk down the hallway felt like a death march. Every co-worker she passed stopped talking when they saw her. Some looked away in embarrassment. Others stared with open curiosity. By the time she reached her supervisor's office, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn the doorknob. "Sit down," her supervisor said, not meeting her eyes. "I can explain. The company has decided to place you on administrative leave while we conduct an internal investigation." The words hit her like a freight train. "You're suspending me? We have to protect the company's interests. This situation has created complications." "What complications? I haven't done anything wrong." "That's for the investigation to determine. You'll receive full pay during the leave, but you're not to contact any clients or colleagues. Your access to company systems will be suspended immediately." Naomi felt like she was drowning. How long? Until this matter is resolved. She wanted to argue, to fight, to demand they listen to her side of the story. But the look on her supervisor's face told her it wouldn't matter. The decision had already been made. Security escorted her to her desk to collect her personal belongings. The box felt pathetically small. A few photos, a coffee mug, a plant she'd bought to brighten up her workspace. 5 months of building a new life, and it all fit in a cardboard box. As she walked to her car, she noticed other employees watching from the windows. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked like they were watching a train wreck. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is just the beginning. Drop the pregnancy claim or it gets worse." The message was unsigned, but she knew exactly who it was from. Asher Blackwood had declared war, and he was winning. But what he didn't know was that Naomi Jenkins had survived worse than him. She'd survived 5 years of emotional abuse, a messy divorce, and starting over with nothing. Have you ever felt like the whole world was against you? Because sometimes the biggest battles teach you who you really are. By morning, Naomi's story had gone viral. She woke up to 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and a news van parked outside her apartment building. Her phone was buzzing so constantly she had to turn it off just to think. The headlines had gotten worse overnight. Michigan woman's desperate scheme, from trailer park to trust fund. The pregnancy trap, how one night could cost a billionaire everything. Blackwood scandal, CEO's nightmare or gold digger's dream. They'd found her high school friends, her college roommate, her ex-husband, who was more than happy to share his opinions about her manipulative nature and inability to be satisfied with what she had. The comment sections were worse than anything she could have imagined. "She's nothing but a ghetto rat trying to climb the social ladder. Look at her. She's not even pretty. Must have been really desperate. Hope she gets prison time for this fraud. Should have stayed in Michigan, where she belongs." The racial undertones in many of the comments made her sick. It wasn't just about the pregnancy or the money. It was about a black woman from a poor background daring to get involved with a wealthy white man. She'd become a symbol of everything people hated about social climbing, about women who supposedly used their bodies to get ahead, about poor people who didn't know their place. Her doorbell rang. Then someone started knocking. "Ms. Jenkins? Channel 7 News. We'd like to get your side of the story." More knocking. "Ms. Jenkins? Atlanta Journal Constitution. Can you comment on the allegations?" She crept to the window and peered through the blinds. There were at least 6 reporters outside, along with camera crews and photographers. Her quiet apartment complex looked like a media circus. Her phone, which she turned back on to call her sister, immediately started ringing. "Naomi, you need to get out of there," her sister said without preamble. "It's all over the news here too. Mom's getting calls from reporters. I can't leave. I have a doctor's appointment this afternoon. Cancel it. This is insane. They're treating you like you're some kind of criminal." The irony wasn't lost on her. She was 8 weeks pregnant, morning sickness was kicking in hard, and she was supposed to be focusing on her health and her baby's development. Instead, She was hiding in her apartment like a fugitive. Her laptop chimed with a new email, then another, then dozens. Death threats, marriage proposals from men who thought she was smart for targeting a rich man, offers from tabloids willing to pay for her story, lawyers promising to make her rich if she'd let them represent her. Everyone wanted a piece of her story, but nobody wanted to hear the truth. Around noon, her building manager called. "Ms. Jenkins, I'm sorry, but the other tenants are complaining about the media circus. The property owners are asking if you might consider finding alternative accommodations until this blows over." She was being evicted, not officially, but the message was clear. Her work email was still active, and she could see the company-wide memo that had gone out that morning. All employees are reminded that personal conduct outside of work can reflect on the company's reputation. Any behavior that brings negative attention to the organization may result in disciplinary action. They weren't mentioning her by name, but everyone knew who they were talking about. By afternoon, she'd lost count of how many news outlets had picked up the story. CNN, Fox News, The Today Show. Her face was everywhere, always paired with the same photo of Asher looking handsome and professional in his expensive suit. The narrative was set: wealthy, successful young businessman versus desperate, scheming woman from the wrong side of the tracks. She found herself staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her was exhausted, scared, and completely alone. Her hand moved to her still flat stomach. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the baby growing inside her. "I'm sorry you're going to be born into this mess." But even as she said it, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in days. Anger. She was tired of being painted as the villain in a story she hadn't written. Tired of being judged by people who didn't know her, who'd never lived her life, who'd never had to fight for everything they had. Asher Blackwood thought he could destroy her reputation and make her disappear. He thought his money and power made him untouchable. He was about to learn that he'd picked the wrong woman to mess with. What would you do if the whole world turned against you? Because Naomi was about to do something that would change everything. The email came on a Tuesday morning while Naomi was hiding in her apartment, trying to ignore the persistent knocking of reporters who still hadn't given up. "Ms. Jenkins, please report to Human Resources on Thursday at 10 a.m. for a mandatory interview regarding recent allegations. Failure to appear may result in termination." She stared at the message, her coffee growing cold in her hands. After 2 weeks of administrative leave, they were finally ready to hear her side of the story. Or pretend to. Thursday morning, she entered the building through the parking garage to avoid the media circus that had taken up permanent residence outside the main entrance. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt like ascending to her own execution. The HR conference room was intimidating by design. A long mahogany table, leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows that made you feel exposed. Waiting for her were 3 people she recognized: Janet Morrison, the head of HR; Michael Chun, the company's legal counsel; and someone she'd never seen before, a stern-looking woman in a gray suit taking notes. "Ms. Jenkins, thank you for coming," Janet said, her voice professionally neutral. "This is Lisa Rodriguez from our external investigation firm. She'll be conducting today's interview." Naomi sat down, feeling like she was facing a firing squad. "Let's start with the company retreat in Savannah," Lisa began, consulting her notes. "Can you walk us through the evening of March 15th? For the next hour, Naomi answered questions about every detail of that night. What time did she arrive at the mixer? How many drinks did she have? Who did she talk to? When did she leave? How did she end up in Mr. Blackwood's room? Each question felt like a trap, designed to catch her in a lie or contradiction. Security footage shows you entering room 314 at 11:43 p.m., Lisa continued. The same room registered to Mr. Blackwood. Can you explain how this happened? I was supposed to be in room 341. I was tired. I'd had a few drinks, and I made a mistake. A mistake that just happened to put you in the CEO's bed. The skepticism in her voice was unmistakable. I didn't know it was his room. I thought it was mine. According to hotel records, you never checked into room 341. Your key card was programmed for room 314. Naomi's heart stopped. That's impossible. Are you saying the hotel records are wrong? I'm saying I was given the wrong room key. I specifically asked for a room on the 3rd floor, away from the noise. Lisa made another note. The hotel staff doesn't remember any such request. Of course they didn't. It had been a busy night, and she'd been just another face in the crowd. But now, 2 months later, her word against their records looked like exactly what Asher's lawyers wanted it to look like, a lie. Let's talk about the pregnancy, Lisa continued. When did you first suspect you were pregnant? About 6 weeks after the retreat. And when did you inform Mr. Blackwood? As soon as I was certain. I took 3 tests to be sure. Why didn't you go to him immediately after the first test? The question caught her off guard. Because I needed to be sure. Because I knew how he'd react. Because I was scared. Scared of what? Of exactly what happened. Of being accused of lying, of trying to trap him, of being painted as some kind of gold digger. Lisa's expression didn't change. Have you ever researched Mr. Blackwood's net worth or inheritance? No. Never looked up his family's wealth or business holdings? No. Our investigation shows several Google searches from your work computer for Blackwood Industries and Asher Blackwood net worth in the weeks following the retreat. Naomi felt the blood drain from her face. Everyone in the company knows about his wealth. It's not exactly a secret. But you specifically searched for information about his inheritance and family trust. She'd been curious about the man she'd slept with, about the company she worked for. It had been innocent research, the kind anyone might do. But in this context, it looked calculating and predatory. I was trying to understand who I was dealing with, she said quietly. So you admit you were dealing with him? Every word was a trap. Every answer made her look more guilty. The interview went on for 2 more hours. They asked about her divorce, her financial situation, her reasons for moving to Georgia. They questioned her about every conversation she'd had with Asher, every email, every moment of eye contact in the hallway. By the end, she felt like she'd been stripped bare and examined under a microscope. We'll be in touch, Janet said as she gathered her papers. You'll remain on administrative leave until we complete our investigation. As Naomi left the building, she realized that the investigation wasn't about finding the truth. It was about building a case to justify firing her. Asher Blackwood hadn't just declared war on her reputation. He was systematically destroying her life, one carefully planned move at a time. But what he didn't know was that some battles reveal information you never expected to find. That night, Naomi sat in her apartment with a bottle of ginger ale and a laptop, determined to understand the man who was trying to destroy her life. If Asher's lawyers could dig up every detail of her past, she could do the same to him. She started with the basics. Asher Blackwood, 25 years old, inherited Blackwood Industries when his father died in a car accident 3 years ago. The company was worth an estimated $4 billion, with holdings in tech, real estate, and manufacturing across the Southeast. But it was the details about his father's will that made her pause. According to several business publications, Richard Blackwood had been obsessed with a family reputation. The will contained specific clauses about maintaining the company's moral standards and ethical image. Any scandal that significantly damaged the Blackwood name could trigger a review of the inheritance. No wonder Asher was so desperate to paint her as the villain. She dug deeper, searching for information about the Blackwood family history. Richard Blackwood had built his fortune in the 1980s, starting with a small manufacturing company in Detroit before expanding into Georgia. Detroit. That caught her attention. She searched for Blackwood Industries Detroit, Michigan 1980s, and found a series of articles from the Detroit Free Press archives. Most were business profiles, but one headline made her blood run cold. Local factory closure leaves hundreds unemployed. The article was from 1987, and it described how Blackwood Industries had suddenly shut down their Detroit plant, laying off 800 workers without notice. The closure had devastated the local community, with many families losing their homes and life savings. But it was the accompanying photo that made her heart stop. A group of unemployed workers protesting outside the factory gates. And there, in the front row, holding a sign that read, "Blackwood stole our future," was a young man who looked exactly like her father. She stared at the grainy photo, her hands trembling. Her father, Marcus Jenkins, had worked at a factory in Detroit in the 1980s. He'd lost his job when she was just a baby, and the family had moved to Flint shortly after. Her mother had always been vague about the details, just saying that the plant closed and we had to start over. But now, seeing this photo, pieces of her childhood suddenly made sense. The way her father's face would darken whenever he saw wealthy businessmen on TV. The bitterness in his voice when he talked about people who get rich off other people's work. The reason he'd never trusted banks or investments, keeping what little money they had in cash under his mattress. She called her mother, her heart pounding. "Mom, I need to ask you something about Dad's job in Detroit." There was a long pause. "Why are you asking about that?" "It's important. The factory where he worked, was it owned by Blackwood Industries?" Another pause, longer this time. "How do you know that name?" "Mom, please. I need to know." She heard her mother sigh. "Your father worked at Blackwood Manufacturing for 12 years. He was a floor supervisor, had good benefits, was planning to retire there. Then one day they just shut down. No warning, no severance pay. Just a notice on the door saying the plant was closed. What happened to Dad after that? He never found steady work again. Not like that. He was 42 years old, and nobody wanted to hire a factory worker without a college degree. We lost the house, had to move in with your grandmother in Flint. Your father, he was never the same after that." Naomi closed her eyes, remembering her father's struggles with depression, his drinking, the way he died at 55 with nothing to his name but regret and bitterness. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me this? What was the point? It wouldn't bring him back or change what happened. We survived, didn't we? We made it through." After hanging up, Naomi sat in the dark, pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. The Blackwood family had built their fortune on the backs of workers like her father. They made their billions by closing factories, cutting jobs, and moving operations to cheaper locations. Richard Blackwood had gotten rich while families like hers had lost everything. And now his son was trying to destroy her life to protect that same fortune. But there was something else, something that made her pulse quicken with possibility. She searched for more information about the Detroit plant closure and found a class action lawsuit that had been filed by the displaced workers. The suit alleged that Blackwood Industries had violated federal labor laws by not providing proper notice of the closure. The case had been settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, but the settlement documents were sealed, except for one detail buried in a legal filing. The settlement had included a clause preventing the affected workers from ever speaking publicly about the case or the company. Her father had been bound by a legal agreement that prevented him from telling his own family the truth about what had happened to him. She stared at the screen, her mind racing. The Blackwood family didn't just have secrets. They had a history of silencing people who threatened their reputation. But what if she could prove it? What if she could show that Asher's family had been destroying lives for decades? For the first time since this nightmare began, Naomi felt a spark of hope. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The next morning, Naomi drove to the Detroit Public Library, her heart pounding with anticipation and dread. She'd spent the night researching everything she could find about the Blackwood Industries plant closure, but she needed more. She needed proof that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. The library's historical archives were housed in a basement room that smelled like old paper and forgotten stories. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, seemed thrilled to help someone research local history. The Blackwood closure was huge news back then, she said, pulling out boxes of newspaper clippings and photographs. Biggest layoff in Detroit that year. Destroyed whole neighborhoods. Naomi spread the materials across the table, her hands shaking as she sorted through decades-old documents. Photos of protesters, interviews with devastated families, editorials calling for corporate accountability. And there, in a folder marked personal testimonies, she found it. A handwritten letter from her father to the Detroit Free Press, dated 3 months after the plant closure. The letter had never been published, but a copy had been kept in the newspaper's files. "My name is Marcus Jenkins, and I worked at Blackwood Manufacturing for 12 years. I want people to know what really happened when they closed our plant. We weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. We were families. We had mortgages, car payments, kids who needed to eat. When Richard Blackwood decided to shut us down, he didn't just take our jobs, he took our futures. But here's what nobody knows. We had a contract, a legally binding agreement that guaranteed our jobs for another 5 years. The plant was profitable. We were meeting all our quotas. But Blackwood found a loophole, a technicality that let him break the contract without consequences. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew we couldn't afford to fight him in court. He knew we had no choice but to take whatever settlement he offered and keep our mouths shut. My daughter is 6 months old. What am I supposed to tell her when she asks why we lost our house? That her father wasn't good enough? That some rich man decided our lives didn't matter? Richard Blackwood is a thief. He stole our livelihoods, our dignity, and our trust. And he's going to get away with it because money always wins. But somebody needs to remember. Somebody needs to know that we mattered. Naomi read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Her father had tried to tell their story. He tried to make people understand what the Blackwood family had done to him, to all of them. But the letter had never been published. It had been filed away and forgotten, just like the families who'd suffered. She photographed the letter with her phone, then kept digging. In another folder, she found the original settlement documents. The legal language was complex, but the meaning was clear. In exchange for a small payout, the affected workers agreed to never speak publicly about the company or the circumstances of their termination. Her father had been bought off and silenced for $12,000. But there was something else in the documents that made her heart race. A clause she almost missed, buried in the legal jargon. This agreement shall be null and void if the company or its representatives engage in actions that violate the spirit of this settlement, including but not limited to harassment, intimidation, or legal action against the affected parties or their immediate family members. She read it again, her pulse quickening. Asher was suing her. He was harassing her, intimidating her, trying to destroy her life. And according to this document, that meant the settlement that had silenced her father was no longer valid. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Found some of your father's old papers in the attic. There's a box marked Blackwood. Want me to send it? Yes, she texted back immediately. Send everything. 3 days later, the box arrived. Inside were documents her father had kept for 30 years. Pay stubs, safety reports, internal company memos, and photographs of him with his co-workers. But the most damning evidence was a handwritten journal her father had kept during his last months at the plant. March 15th, 1987, management meeting today. Overheard Blackwood talking to his lawyers about cleaning house and eliminating redundancies. He was looking right at the factory floor when he said it. March 22nd, 1987, new safety inspector came by. Blackwood's man, not the state inspector. He marked down violations that don't exist, problems that we fixed months ago. Something's not right. April 2nd, 1987, got word that the plant is closing. Blackwood claims it's because of safety violations and low productivity. But our numbers are good, better than good. We're one of the most profitable plants in the company. April 5th, 1987, talked to Jimmy Rodriguez in accounting. He says Blackwood's been moving money around, making it look like we're losing money when we're not. It's all fake. The whole closure is fake. Naomi sat back, her head spinning. Her father had known. He'd figured out that the closure was a scam, a way for Richard Blackwood to break union contracts and move operations to cheaper, non-union locations. But he'd been silenced before he could expose the truth. She looked at the photograph of her father that she kept on her desk, a young man in his work clothes, proud and hopeful, holding his infant daughter. He'd never gotten justice. He died believing that powerful people always win, that the system was rigged against people like him. But his daughter was about to prove him wrong. Naomi picked up her phone and dialed the number for the one person who might be able to help her. Hello, I'd like to speak to an investigative journalist about a story involving corporate fraud and a decades-old cover-up. The truth was about to come out, and Asher Blackwood was about to learn that some secrets refused to stay buried. Everything you thought you knew is about to change. This revelation will flip the entire game. Would you like me to proceed with the final 5 chapters, or would you prefer any adjustments to these sections? Naomi sat across from her lawyer, Marcus Chun, in his downtown Atlanta office. The evidence was spread across his mahogany desk like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. Her father's employment records, the settlement documents, and most importantly, the board meeting minutes from 1998. This changes everything, Marcus said, adjusting his glasses. Asher's father didn't just fire your dad. He destroyed him to cover up his own mistakes. Naomi's hands trembled as she held the photograph of her father shaking hands with Robert Blackwood at the company Christmas party, just months before everything fell apart. Her dad looked so young, so hopeful. He had no idea what was coming. "My father never told me any of this," she whispered. "He just said he lost his job and we had to move." "He was protecting you," Marcus replied. "But now we have leverage, real leverage." The next morning, Naomi walked into Blackwood Industries with her head held high for the first time in weeks. The whispers followed her through the hallways, but she didn't care anymore. She had work to do. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister in Michigan. Mama found more papers in Daddy's old toolbox. Sending photos now. The images that came through made Naomi's heart race. Patent applications, signed by her father. Engineering drawings with his handwriting. Proof that the revolutionary safety system that made Blackwood Industries billions wasn't just inspired by her father's work. It was his work. At lunch, she called her mother. "Mama, why didn't you ever tell me about Daddy's inventions?" Her mother's voice cracked. "Baby, your father made me promise never speak of it. He said it would only bring us trouble. But after what they're doing to you, what exactly happened, Mama? Your daddy created that whole safety system. Robert Blackwood stole it. Then when your father threatened to go public, they framed him for stealing company secrets. We had to leave Georgia with nothing." Naomi closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 25 years of injustice. Her father had died 5 years ago, never knowing his daughter would one day work for the same company that destroyed his life. That afternoon, she made copies of everything and secured them in a safety deposit box. Then she did something that would change the game forever. She called the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. "I have a story for you," she told the investigative reporter, "about corporate theft, cover-ups, and how one family built an empire on stolen ideas." Meanwhile, Asher was drowning in his own problems. His lawyers were demanding more money for the lawsuit. His mother called every day, crying about the family reputation. The board was scheduling emergency meetings. But the real pressure came from his inheritance. According to his father's will, any scandal that damaged the company's reputation by more than 10% stock value would trigger a review of his inheritance. They were already down 8%. His assistant knocked on his door. "Mr. Blackwood, there's a reporter here from the Journal-Constitution. She says she has questions about your father's business practices in the 1990s. Asher's blood ran cold. Tell her I'm not available." She said she'll wait. She also mentioned something about stolen patents and a man named David Johnson. The name hit Asher like a punch to the gut. David Johnson. Where had he heard that name before? He rushed to his father's old office, now converted to a storage room. Boxes of old files lined the walls. He searched frantically until he found it, a folder marked D. Johnson, Confidential Settlement. Inside were documents that made his hands shake. Employment termination. Non-disclosure agreements, settlement payments. And in his father's handwriting on a sticky note, problem solved. DJ will never work in this industry again. Asher stared at the papers, his mind racing. David Johnson, D. The same initials as Naomi's maiden name, Naomi DJ Harris. Johnson was her father's name. His phone rang. It was his head of security. "Mr. Blackwood, we have a problem. Someone's been asking questions about your father's business dealings. They've been to the county courthouse, the patent office, and they've spoken to 3 former employees. Who? We think it's connected to the Harris situation. Sir, if what we're hearing is true, this could destroy everything." Asher hung up and immediately called his lawyer. "We need to settle. Now." "What?" "You were determined to fight this. Things have changed. What will it take to make this go away? She's not just asking for money anymore. Asher. Her lawyers sent new demands this morning. They want a public apology, full financial support for the child, and they want access to your father's business records from 1995 to 2000. The room felt like it was closing in. Asher realized he wasn't just fighting for his reputation anymore. He was fighting for his family's entire legacy. That evening, Naomi sat in her apartment, feeling her baby kick for the first time. She placed her hand on her belly and whispered, "Your granddaddy was a good man, baby, and Mama's gonna make sure the world knows it." Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk." AB. She stared at the message. After all his lawyers, all his threats, now Asher wanted to talk directly. She typed back, "Too late for that." But as she hit send, she wondered if she was making the right choice. The war was escalating, and she was about to become a mother. Was revenge worth risking everything? The next morning would bring answers that neither of them were prepared for. The meeting was set for neutral ground, a conference room at Marcus Chen's law office. Naomi arrived first, her hands resting on her growing belly. At 6 months pregnant, she couldn't hide it anymore. The baby seemed to move more when she was stressed, as if sensing the tension in the room. Asher walked in with his lawyer, but his eyes immediately went to Naomi's stomach. For a moment, his composed mask slipped, and she saw something she hadn't expected: vulnerability. "Before we start," Marcus announced, "my client has some information that changes the nature of this entire situation." Asher's lawyer, a sharp woman named Victoria Cross, straightened in her chair. "What kind of information?" Naomi reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder. She slid it across the table to Asher. "Open it." Inside was the photograph of her father with Robert Blackwood, along with copies of the patent applications and settlement documents. Asher's face went pale as he recognized his father's handwriting. "David Johnson was my father," Naomi said quietly. "The man your father destroyed." The room fell silent. Victoria Cross grabbed the documents, scanning them quickly. This doesn't prove anything." "It proves everything," Marcus interjected. "Robert Blackwood stole David Johnson's safety system designs. Then when David threatened to expose the theft, Blackwood framed him for corporate espionage. The settlement was hush money." Asher stared at the photograph. "I remember him," he said slowly. "He came to the house once when I was little. My father was yelling at him in the study. I hid on the stairs and listened." "What did you hear?" Naomi asked. "My father was threatening him. Said he'd make sure he never worked anywhere again if he didn't sign some papers." Asher looked up at her. "I didn't understand it then, but now you know your family's fortune was built on stolen ideas," Naomi finished. "My father never got credit for the work that made you rich." Victoria Cross tried to regain control. "Even if this is true, it doesn't change the fact that you pursued my client for financial gain." "I didn't pursue anyone." Naomi's voice rose. "I made a mistake, walked into the wrong room, and woke up pregnant. I never asked for anything until your clients sued me for fraud." Asher held up his hand. "Victoria, stop." He turned to Naomi. "I need to know something. That night in Savannah, did you know who I was?" "I knew you were the CEO. I didn't know you were Robert Blackwood's son until I saw the family photo in your office the next week." "And when did you find out about your father?" 3 weeks ago. I was looking for anything that could help my case, and I found my father's old papers." Naomi's voice cracked. "He died 5 years ago, never knowing I'd end up working for the same company that ruined his life. The weight of generations crashed down on both of them." Asher ran his hands through his hair. "My father never told me about any of this." "Of course he didn't," Naomi said. "He made sure no one would ever know. But I know now, and soon everyone will know." "What do you want?" Asher asked directly. "I want the truth told. I want my father's name cleared. And I want this baby to grow up knowing that his grandfather was a brilliant man who got cheated, not a failure who couldn't provide for his family." Victoria Cross leaned forward. "The inheritance clause in your father's will." "I know about the inheritance," Asher interrupted. "If the company stock drops more than 10% due to scandal, the board can review my right to inherit. We're already at 8% because of this lawsuit." "Then you know what's at stake," Victoria said. "Yeah, Edo." Asher stood up suddenly. I know that my entire life has been built on a lie." He walked to the window, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. "You know what the crazy part is? I actually remember your father. He was kind to me. Brought me a toy car once when he came to the house. I was maybe 7 or 8. Naomi felt tears building. He always carried toy cars in his truck. Said you never knew when you'd meet a kid who needed a smile. He was a good man, wasn't he? The best." Asher turned back to face her. "I'm sorry for what my father did to yours and for what I did to you. I was scared and I acted like your father?" Naomi suggested. The words hit him hard. "Yeah, like my father." Victoria Cross stood up. "Asher, I strongly advise against any admissions of guilt." "I'm not admitting legal guilt," he said. "I'm admitting I was wrong. There's a difference." "What happens now?" Naomi asked. "Now we figure out how to make this right," Asher said. "The lawsuit gets dropped immediately, and we find a way to tell the truth about your father without destroying innocent people who work for this company." "And the baby?" Naomi asked quietly. For the first time since she'd known him, Asher smiled. "The baby gets a father who's going to try to be better than his own father was." Marcus Chun cleared his throat. "We'll need to draft new agreements. Child support, visitation rights, and a public statement about the lawsuit being resolved." "And the patent theft?" Naomi asked. Asher was quiet for a long moment. "Give me time to figure out how to handle that. But I promise you, your father's name will be cleared." As they prepared to leave, Asher touched Naomi's arm gently. "Can I ask you something personal?" "What? What are you hoping for? Boy or girl?" Naomi smiled for the first time in weeks. "Healthy. That's all I want." "Me too," he said. "Me too." Walking out of that conference room, both of them knew their lives had changed forever. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. 3 months later, Naomi stood in the conference room at Blackwood Industries, her 8-month pregnant belly making it difficult to reach the microphone. The room was packed with reporters, company employees, and board members. This was the moment she'd dreamed about since discovering the truth about her father. Asher stood beside her, his face serious but supportive. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of legal negotiations, DNA tests, and difficult conversations. But they'd made it to this moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Asher began, "today we're here to correct a wrong that happened 25 years ago." The crowd quieted. Cameras flashed. In 1998, my father, Robert Blackwood, stole the innovative safety system designs that built this company's reputation. Those designs belonged to David Johnson, a brilliant engineer who trusted my father with his life's work. Murmurs rippled through the room. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. David Johnson was Naomi Harris's father, Asher continued. "And today, we're setting the record straight." Naomi stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "My father spent his whole life believing he was a failure. He thought he wasn't smart enough, wasn't good enough to succeed in corporate America. He died thinking he'd let his family down." She paused, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "But the truth is, my father was a genius. His safety innovations have saved thousands of lives. They've made this company billions of dollars. And it's time the world knew his name." The room erupted in questions from reporters. How much compensation is being paid? Will there be criminal charges? What about the inheritance implications? Asher held up his hand. "We're establishing the David Johnson Innovation Fund with an initial contribution of $50 million. This fund will support young engineers from underrepresented communities, ensuring that talent like David Johnson's is never again ignored or stolen." Additionally, Naomi added, "Every safety system manufactured by Blackwood Industries will carry a plaque crediting David Johnson as the original designer." A reporter raised her hand. "Ms. Harris, what about your personal lawsuit against Mr. Blackwood?" Naomi glanced at Asher. "That lawsuit was dropped 3 months ago. Mr. Blackwood and I have reached a private agreement regarding our child and our co-parenting relationship." "Are you two in a relationship?" another reporter shouted. "We're learning to be friends," Asher answered, "and we're committed to raising our child together." After the press conference, Naomi sat in her office, finally able to breathe. Her phone rang. It was her mother. "Baby, I just watched the news. Your daddy would be so proud." Naomi wiped away tears. I wish he was here to see it. He is here, baby. He's in that strength you showed up there. He's in the fight you fought for his name. That evening, Naomi was packing up her desk when Asher knocked on her door. Getting ready for maternity leave? Next week's my last week. Doctor's orders. I have something for you. He handed her a small wrap box. Inside was a vintage toy car, red and worn from years of play. My father gave this to me when I was 7. But before that, your father gave it to me. I found it in my childhood things last month. Naomi held the little car, imagining her father's hands placing it in young Asher's palm. He would have loved knowing you turn out to be a good man. I'm trying to be. It's harder than I expected. The board meeting went well today. Asher nodded. They're not happy about the settlement amount, but they understand the legal liability we avoided. The stock has actually started recovering. And your inheritance? Secure. Turns out doing the right thing is good for business. Who knew? They laughed, the tension that had defined their relationship for so long finally lifting. Asher, can I ask you something? Anything. Are you ready to be a father? He was quiet for a moment. I'm terrified, but I'm also excited. I want to be the kind of father your dad was to you. He wasn't perfect, Naomi said, but he was present. He showed up. That's all any kid really needs. I can do that. 2 weeks later, Naomi went into labor at 3 a.m. She called Asher, who arrived at the hospital still in his pajamas, carrying a bag of snacks and looking absolutely panicked. Is this really happening? He asked the nurse. Sir, she's about to have a baby. Yes, it's happening. 14 hours later, David Robert Harris Blackwood entered the world, screaming his displeasure at the bright lights and cold air. Naomi held him first, counting his fingers and toes, marveling at his perfect little face. He looks like you, she told Asher, who was crying and trying to pretend he wasn't. He has your eyes, Asher whispered, gently touching his son's tiny hand. David Robert, Naomi said, after both our fathers. Perfect. The next morning, Naomi's hospital room was filled with flowers. From her family in Michigan, from co-workers, from Asher's mother, who had flown in from California, and surprisingly, from members of the board of directors. The whole company is talking about him, Asher said, holding his son while Naomi rested. They're calling him the future of Blackwood Industries. He can be whatever he wants to be, Naomi said firmly. That's the point. You're right. No pressure, little man. Just be happy. As she watched Asher rock their son, Naomi thought about the journey that had brought them here. A wrong room, a night of wine and poor judgment, months of legal battles, and the discovery of a family secret that changed everything. But looking at her son, safe in his father's arms, she knew it had all been worth it. David Johnson's legacy would live on, not in corporate profits, but in the values they would teach this child. The fight was over. The real work, building a family, was just beginning. 1 year later, Naomi stood in the kitchen of her new home in Marietta, Georgia, watching Asher attempt to feed mashed sweet potatoes to their son. David, now 13 months old, was more interested in smearing the orange goo on his father's shirt than eating it. I think he's testing me, Asher said, wiping sweet potato out of his hair. He's definitely testing you, Naomi laughed. You're failing. Thanks for the confidence boost. The past year had been a journey neither of them had expected. What started as a co-parenting arrangement had slowly evolved into something deeper. They hadn't rushed into anything. Both had too much healing to do for that. But friendship had grown into trust, and trust had grown into love. Mama called this morning, Naomi said, settling into the chair across from them. She wants to know if we're coming to Michigan for Christmas. What did you tell her? That we talk about it. She's been asking about our relationship status again. Asher grinned. What did you tell her about that? That it's complicated. Is it complicated? Naomi looked at him, this man who had gone from her worst nightmare to her closest friend. Sometimes, but good complicated. David banged a spoon on his high chair tray, demanding attention. Both parents turned to him, and he rewarded them with a gummy smile covered in sweet potato. He's got your charm, Naomi